Imagine you're alone. The sun's gone, and the trail you were just hiking has vanished into black shadows. Every rustle of leaves, every distant animal call makes your heart pound. You tell yourself it's just your imagination running wild, but then you see it. Something moving in the trees, something that isn't an animal and isn't human. America's national parks. They're vast, beautiful, and wild, places where millions of us go for adventure and escape. But for a few unlucky people, these pristine wildernesses have offered something else, something terrifying. Tonight, we're looking at 7 of the most bone-chilling encounters ever reported from these parks. These aren't just ghost stories. They are tales of terrifying creatures that will make you think twice about hiking alone.
The stone-skinned witch of the Great Smoky Mountains. First, we're heading deep into the rolling, misty hills of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a place of stunning beauty on the border of North Carolina and Tennessee. This land is steeped in ancient history, home to the Cherokee people for thousands of years, and with that history comes folklore, legends born from the deep woods and dark hollows. One of the most terrifying is the story of Spearfinger. According to Cherokee legend, Spearfinger, or Utlunta, is a witch-like creature with skin as hard as stone, which makes her nearly indestructible. But her most horrifying feature is the one that gives her her name. Her right forefinger is a razor-sharp, spear-like weapon made of solid rock. She uses it to pierce the livers of her victims, especially children, which she then eats. The legends say she's a shapeshifter, often appearing as an old woman to lure her prey. She can mimic the voices of your loved ones and moves with a sound like rolling thunder. For generations, this story was a cautionary tale to keep children from wandering off into the woods. But some stories are more than just warnings. Some are real. This story comes from a seasoned backpacker named Ben, who was attempting a solo thru hike on a remote part of the Appalachian Trail in the fall of 2018. The autumn colors were incredible, but a thick, soupy fog, the smoke that gives the mountains their name, had settled in the valleys, killing visibility and muffling all sound. It was on his 3rd day, near a rugged pass not far from Whiteside Mountain, a place long associated with Spearfinger's lore, that his trip took a dark turn. As dusk settled in, Ben made camp. He felt a weird chill in the air, a damp cold that seemed to get into his bones. While making dinner, he heard a sound. It was faint at first, a rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. He figured it was a woodpecker or falling acorns, but the sound grew steadier, more deliberate. He scanned the dense woods, but the swirling mist hid everything. Then a voice cut through the fog. "Are you lost, dear?" Ben froze. The voice was that of an old woman, frail and gentle, and it seemed to come from just outside his campfire light. He called out, asking if she needed help. "Oh no, child," the voice replied, closer now. "Just an old woman out for a walk. My, it's gotten so dark. Could I perhaps warm myself by your fire for a moment?" Every instinct in Ben's body screamed that this was wrong. No elderly woman would be out here, miles from any road, as night was falling. He stood up, peering into the gloom. He could just make out a hunched-over silhouette. As she shuffled closer, the tapping sound returned, a sharp clink with every other step. She stepped into the firelight, and Ben's blood ran cold. She was ancient, her face a mess of deep wrinkles, but her eyes had a glint that was anything but frail. She was wrapped in a heavy cloak, keeping her right hand hidden in its folds. "So kind of you," she rasped, her voice now holding a grating edge. Ben, completely terrified, mumbled that he was packing up to leave. As he turned to grab his pack, he felt a sudden, intense pressure on his back. It didn't hurt. It felt more like a powerful, deep poke. He stumbled forward and caught himself on a tree. When he spun around, the old woman was gone. The only sound was the fading, rhythmic clink, clink, clink as she moved away into the fog. Ben didn't sleep. He packed up in a panic and hiked through the dark, not stopping until sunrise. He felt exhausted but fine, and tried to convince himself it was just a strange encounter. But over the next few days, a deep weakness set in. He felt drained with a strange internal ache. When he finally got to a town and saw a doctor, they couldn't find anything wrong with him. Yet that feeling of having something essential stolen from him lingered for months. He never went back to the Smokies. He believes he met Spearfinger and that he was lucky to escape with his life. From an ancient witch in the Smokies, our next story takes us to the blood-soaked grounds of a Civil War battlefield, where something born of pure carnage still stalks the night.
Old Green Eyes of Chickamauga. Just south of the Tennessee border, in northern Georgia, you'll find the Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park. It's a somber place, preserving the site of the second bloodiest battle of the Civil War. In September 1863, over 2 brutal days, nearly 35,000 soldiers were killed or wounded. The ground itself is soaked in tragedy, and it's said that where there's great trauma, spirits linger. But among the ghostly soldiers, there is something else, something older and much, much worse. It's known only as Old Green Eyes. The legend is a strange one. Some say it's the ghost of a soldier whose head was taken off by a cannonball, and he's now searching for his body. Others think it's not human at all, an ancient thing drawn to all the suffering and death. Descriptions going all the way back to the battle itself tell of a monster-like figure with long, stringy hair and a messed-up jaw with fangs, seen moving among the bodies on the field. But the one thing that's in every single story is the creature's defining feature, a pair of bright, piercing green eyes that glow in the dark. For over 150 years, visitors, locals, and even park rangers have reported seeing those terrifying eyes floating through the woods. This story comes from the 1970s. A young man named Mark was driving home late one night through the darkened battlefield. It was a moonless night, the park was closed, and the road was pitch black. Mark was tired when his headlights suddenly caught something on the side of the road. He slowed down, thinking it was a deer, but it wasn't. Standing just at the edge of the woods was a tall, hulking figure. It was way too big to be a person. It seemed to be covered in dark, matted hair or rags. Mark felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach and sped up to get away from whatever it was. As he passed it, he glanced in his rearview mirror. The figure was gone. He breathed a sigh of relief, but then his headlights flickered and died, plunging him into total darkness. The truck sputtered and rolled to a stop, dead. He was stranded in the middle of Chickamauga battlefield. He grabbed a flashlight and got out to check under the hood. The air was cold and dead silent, not even crickets. The silence was so deep it was almost a noise itself. As his eyes adjusted, he saw them. About 50 yards back down the road, 2 faint green lights had appeared. They just hovered in the air. Mark stared, trying to figure out what he was seeing. Reflections? No. As he watched, the lights began to move, floating smoothly and silently toward him. They weren't car lights. They moved with a terrifying purpose. Fear, cold and sharp, shot through him. He scrambled back into his truck and locked the door. The green eyes got closer, their light getting brighter. They weren't just lights, they were eyes, glowing with a sick, predatory light. They stopped right in front of his truck, about 6 feet off the ground, and just stared. Mark could feel pure hatred radiating from them. For what felt like forever, the creature just watched him, its glowing green eyes burning into his soul. Suddenly, the sound of an approaching car broke the spell.
Headlights appeared down the road. As the light washed over the area, old Green Eyes vanished, just gone. The approaching car slowed, and a park ranger pulled up. Shaking, Mark told the ranger what he'd seen. The ranger didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly, his face grim. He said he'd had his own run-in with a tall, dark figure back in 1976. He helped Mark get his truck started. It turned over on the first try, and said, "Son, some things on this battlefield are best left alone. You go on home now." Mark never drove through Chickamauga at night again. From spectral lights in the east, we travel west to a canyon so vast it holds its own secrets and its own kind of sorrow. A place where the wind itself seems to carry the cries of the dead.
The Wailing Woman of the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon is one of the world's most breathtaking wonders, but its size is also intimidating. It's a place that can make you feel incredibly small, where one wrong step can be your last. And on the quiet North Rim, a less traveled area, a tragedy from almost a century ago gave birth to a lingering, spectral sadness. This is the story of the Wailing Woman. The legend says that back in the 1920s, a woman, her husband, and their son were staying at the historic Grand Canyon Lodge. The husband and son went for a hike along the Transept Trail. A sudden, violent storm rolled in, and they both lost their footing on the slick rock and fell to their deaths. Overcome with grief, the wife and mother wandered the trails day and night, crying out for her lost family. Eventually, unable to bear it, she took her own life in the lodge. Ever since, her spirit has been seen and heard, forever searching. She's described as a figure in a white dress with blue flowers, her face hidden by a scarf, restlessly roaming the trail and the lodge, her heartbroken sobs echoing on the wind. This encounter happened to a couple, Sarah and Tom, who were on an anniversary trip to the North Rim. They were experienced hikers and chose the Transept Trail for an evening stroll. The air got cold fast as the sun disappeared, and the trail, once busy, was now empty. A strong wind began to howl. As they walked back toward the lodge, Sarah stopped. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Tom listened. Over the wind, he could hear it too, a faint, mournful sound. It was a woman crying, not just crying, but wailing, a sound of pure anguish. They were miles from any road, and the trail behind them was empty. They started walking faster. The crying grew louder, seeming to come from the canyon itself, then from the woods beside them, as if the source was moving. It was deeply unsettling. They started to jog, the lodge lights a welcome beacon in the distance. As they rounded a sharp bend, they both saw her. Standing under a pinyon pine was a woman in a long, light-colored dress. Her head was covered by a scarf, and her back was to them, her shoulders shaking with sobs. The wailing was coming directly from her. Tom called out, "Ma'am, are you okay?" The figure didn't turn around. The wailing just continued. Sarah felt a wave of empathy mixed with a powerful sense of dread. Something was very wrong. "Can we help you?" Sarah asked gently. At her voice, the woman stopped crying. She stood perfectly still. Then, without turning, she began to glide. She didn't walk, she floated, moving silently off the trail and into the trees, straight toward the canyon's edge. "Wait! Stop!" Tom shouted, terrified she was going to fall. They ran to the spot where she had been, but she was gone. They peered over the edge into the black abyss. There was nothing. The trail was empty. The woods were silent. The wailing had stopped. Shaken, they hurried back to the lodge. When they mentioned their experience to a bartender, an old Navajo man who had worked there for decades, he simply nodded. He told them they weren't the first. They had met the Wailing Woman, forever searching for the family she lost. He said she's a spirit of sorrow, not evil, but her grief is so powerful it stains the very air of the North Rim. Sorrow echoes in many of our wild places. Our next tale comes from the granite cliffs of Yosemite, where the phantom cries of a lost child have been luring and terrifying hikers for over 150 years.
The Cries of Grouse Lake. Yosemite National Park is a jewel of the Sierra Nevada, but beyond the bustling valley are thousands of acres of remote high country. It's in these lonely places that the oldest and darkest stories live. One comes from Grouse Lake, a small, chilly alpine lake miles from anywhere. The story was first recorded in the 1850s by Galen Clark, the first guardian of what would become Yosemite. While hiking near the lake, Clark heard a distinct wailing cry, somewhat like a puppy when lost. He later asked a group of Awanachee hunters about it. They told him it was no dog. It was the spirit of a Native American boy who had drowned in the lake long ago. They warned him that the spirit cries out to people, and anyone who goes in the water to help will be grabbed and pulled down to their death. For over 150 years, hikers and even park rangers have reported hearing these same chilling cries. This modern story is from a backpacker named Jessica, who camped at Grouse Lake with her boyfriend David in 2012. They made the tough hike for the solitude it promised. As evening fell, they were the only two people there. They were sitting by their campfire when they heard it, a faint cry drifting from the far side of the lake. It sounded like a child whimpering for help. "Help me, please!" Jessica and David jumped to their feet. They grabbed powerful flashlights and scanned the opposite shore, but saw nothing but trees and rocks. The cries continued, desperate. It sounded so real, their first instinct was to find a way to help. "Maybe a kid wandered off from another camp?" he whispered, even though they knew they were alone. They shouted back, "Hello? Are you okay?" The only reply was another sob, then a clear, pleading, "I'm in the water. It's so cold." David started toward the lake's edge, ready to swim across, but Jessica grabbed his arm, a cold knot of fear in her stomach. She remembered reading the folklore about the lake before their trip, a story she'd dismissed as a campfire tale, the story of the drowned boy. "David, wait," she said, her voice trembling. "Don't go in the water. Remember the story?" He hesitated, torn. The crying suddenly grew more frantic, a sound designed to trigger a rescue. They kept sweeping the shoreline with their lights, shouting until their throats were raw, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to come from the lake itself. At one point, they heard a distinct splash from the middle of the dark, still lake, as if someone had just gone under. The sound sent them scrambling back from the water's edge. They didn't sleep that night. They sat with their backs against a boulder, listening to the phantom cries until they finally faded just before dawn. As soon as the sun was up, they packed and practically ran back down the trail. They reported it to a ranger who listened patiently. When they finished, he said, "You're not the first to hear him. You were wise not to go in the water." While some spirits cry out in sorrow, others are trapped in a loop, forced to haunt the site of their own tragic death. For our fifth story, we're going to the geothermal heart of America's first national park.
The Headless Bride of Yellowstone. Yellowstone is a land of geysers and canyons, but one of its most famous landmarks is a building, the Old Faithful Inn. Built in 1904, this masterpiece of rustic architecture is as iconic as the geyser it's named for. It's a place rich with history, and according to many, it's also rich with ghosts. The most famous is the Headless Bride. The story is a grim one. In the early 1900s, a wealthy young woman married a man her family didn't approve of. Her father gave them a large sum of money and basically told them to get lost. They ended up at the Old Faithful Inn on their honeymoon. By this point, the husband had gambled away most of the money. After a huge fight in their room, the husband stormed out and was never seen again. Days later, hotel staff, worried about the bride, entered her room and found a horrific scene. The bride had been decapitated in the bathtub. Her head was missing. After a frantic search, it was found high up in the crow's nest, a now closed-off balcony above the main lobby where the orchestra used to play. Ever since, guests and employees have reported chilling encounters. The most common is a ghost in a white wedding dress walking the halls and, most unnervingly, coming down the grand staircase carrying her own severed head. This account is from a former night auditor at the Old Faithful Inn. We'll call him Frank, who worked the graveyard shift in the early 2000s. He was a skeptic and had heard all the ghost stories, but he was used to the old building's creaks and groans. One night, during the quiet off-season, Frank was alone at the front desk. A snowstorm was raging outside. Around 3 a.m., he heard a sound from the main staircase, the soft rustle of a long dress against the wooden steps. He looked up, but the staircase was empty. A few minutes later, he heard it again, closer this time. He stood up and peered into the dim light. Nothing. That's when he saw her. Standing on the second-floor landing, looking down into the lobby, was a woman in an old-fashioned white wedding gown. He couldn't see her face in the shadows. "Ma'am, can I help you?" he called out. The figure didn't respond. She just started to descend the stairs with a weird gliding grace. As she came down, the light from the fireplace caught her, and Frank's breath caught in his throat. Where her head should have been, there was just nothing, and cradled in her arm like a bouquet was her head. Its eyes were closed, its expression calm. Frank was frozen behind the desk, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. The headless ghost reached the bottom of the stairs, turned, and glided silently across the lobby. She passed within 20 feet of the front desk, moved toward the massive front doors, and went straight through them into the swirling snowstorm. The moment she was gone, Frank collapsed into his chair, shaking uncontrollably. He finished his contract, but never returned to work at the Old Faithful Inn. He's not a skeptic anymore. Not all horrors come from human tragedy. Some are just there, waiting in the darkness of the earth. Our next story takes us deep underground to a place where the shadows themselves seem to be alive.
The shadows of Lehman Caves. In the remote high desert of eastern Nevada is Great Basin National Park. Beneath the ancient bristlecone pines lies a hidden world, Lehman Caves. This marble cave system is a wonderland of strange formations. For over a century, people have taken ranger-led tours to see its beauty. But some visitors have left feeling that they weren't alone in the dark. The caves have long been associated with paranormal activity, ghostly miners, whispers in the passages, but the most common reports are of shadowy figures flitting at the edge of the tour group's light and the unnerving feeling of being watched from the total darkness just off the trail. This story comes from the Miller family, who took a tour a few years ago. Deep inside the cave, their youngest son, an 8-year-old named Leo, started acting strange. He kept looking over his shoulder into the unlit parts of the cavern. He tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, "who's that man?"
His mother saw nothing but rock formations and shadows. "There's no one there, sweetie," she said. "No," Leo insisted. "There's a tall, skinny man back there. He's watching us." A few minutes later, the father, Mike, saw something himself. As the ranger's flashlight swept across the ceiling, the edge of the beam caught a flicker of movement in a side passage. It was a tall, unnaturally thin, black silhouette. It was there for a split second before it seemed to pull back into the darkness. Mike blinked, telling himself it was just a shadow. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger for both him and his wife. They felt it as a real pressure coming from the black voids all around them. The climax came near the end of the tour. The ranger announced she was going to demonstrate total darkness. She warned everyone to stay still and then, with a click, killed all the lights. The blackness was instantaneous and absolute. A few seconds into the darkness, Leo gasped. Then his mother screamed. The ranger immediately flicked the lights back on. Leo was crying, clinging to his mother's leg. "What's wrong?" the ranger asked. Leo's mother was pale and shaking. Something touched my hair," she whispered. "It felt like cold, long fingers." At the same time, Mike was staring at the cave wall just off the path. In the thin layer of dust on the rock, there was a mark that hadn't been there before. A long, dark smear, as if something tall had brushed against the wall as it moved past them in the dark. The ranger quickly ended the tour. The Millers believe that deep in the ancient darkness of Lehman Caves, something resides, something that watches from the shadows and sometimes reaches out to touch you in the dark. But maybe the scariest encounters aren't with a single creature, but with a place itself, a place that seems to have a mind of its own. For our final chilling story, we return to the granite heights of Yosemite.
The Curse of Tenaya Canyon. We've already visited Yosemite for the cries at Grouse Lake, but our last story takes us to a place so notoriously dangerous that park rangers have grimly nicknamed it the Bermuda Triangle of Yosemite. This is Tenaya Canyon. The Park Service actively discourages hikers from entering it, and for good reason. Beyond the treacherous terrain, the canyon is said to be cursed. The curse comes from Chief Tenaya, the last leader of the Ahwanichi people to live in Yosemite Valley. In the 1850s, during a conflict with settlers, Chief Tenaya's son was shot and killed while trying to escape. Heartbroken and enraged, Chief Tenaya cursed the land, vowing that anyone who disturbed it would meet with misfortune. Over the years, a shocking number of hikers have died, been injured, or vanished in the canyon. Even the famous naturalist John Muir was nearly killed by a fall there. Many believe the chief's curse is an active, malevolent force. This account comes from two rock climbers, Alex and Brian, who decided to attempt the off-trail descent of the canyon in the summer of 2016. They were highly experienced and equipped, and they dismissed the curse as just folklore. They started their journey on a clear, hot morning. As they got deeper, the atmosphere changed. The air grew heavy and still. An unnerving silence fell. They both felt a strange sense of being watched. Then the problems started. A compass that spun wildly, a GPS that couldn't get a signal. They became disoriented, a feeling neither had ever experienced. As the afternoon wore on, they started hearing noises, faint whispers on the wind, the sound of rocks falling from the cliffs above them when no one was there. The real terror began when they reached a narrow slot canyon that required several rappels. As Brian set up the anchor, his brand new rope slipped from his hands and inexplicably slithered over the edge, falling hundreds of feet below. It was an impossible accident. They were trapped.
As dusk settled, the whispers around them grew louder, turning into guttural chanting that seemed to come from the rocks themselves. Then came the laughter, cold, mocking laughter that echoed through the gorge. They spent a terrifying night huddled on the ledge, convinced they were going to die. The next morning, by pure luck, a search and rescue helicopter spotted them. They were rescued, suffering from dehydration, but otherwise okay. When they told their story to the rescue team, a weary-looking ranger just shook his head. "You don't listen, do you? The signs aren't just there for the terrain. You were in Tanaya's house. He doesn't like visitors." Alex and Brian no longer believe the curse is just folklore. They believe they met an ancient, powerful anger in that canyon. From stone-skinned witches to spectral grief, from glowing eyes on a battlefield to the land itself rising up against intruders, the national parks are America's greatest treasures, but they also hold deep mysteries and ancient powers we don't understand. These stories you've heard tonight are a reminder that when we step into the wild, we're entering a world that isn't entirely our own, a world where not all legends are just stories. So the next time you're on a lonely trail as darkness falls, listen closely and ask yourself, what else is lurking in the shadows? If you have a story of your own, a chilling encounter from a wild place that you can't explain, share it in the comments below. We'd love to read it. And if you enjoyed these tales from the edge of the map, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. Stay safe out there.